You said early on that nothing is what it seems when you face an enemy in combat, and that you should be ready for anything. Then I started mulling over what you said about infusing a piece of wood and metal with magic. But wood and metal aren't sentient, so how could you do that? It seemed more likely that you were operating Big Oost yourself, controlling its movements by thought. You could see what was coming. You could anticipate what I was going to do. That Big Oost was responding to your own instinct. I was fighting you, after all. Exactly. You were trying to break past my defenses, and I was trying to stop you. So, it's time we move on. Until now, you hadn't gotten to the place you were ready to test yourself against an attack I might mount. That's what we will work on next. Sit and have a drink of water, and we'll start anew. Starting anew, as it turned out, quickly washed away any lingering sense of accomplishment and thrust the Highlander directly into a fresh kind of suffering. Now Big Oost was free to attack him, and he was forced to defend himself. He was allowed to counter, but not to directly attack his adversary. This was the next phase of his training, Oost Mandara advised. Now he would be required to concentrate solely on defensive work and holding strategies until he mastered those sufficiently. His reward for this promotion was a body that ached all over from blows struck by his attacker that he failed to adequately block and that left him bruised and battered. When that day's session had ended and he went back to his room and peeled off his clothes to bathe, he found his body was a rainbow of dark colors that formed intricate patterns over torso and limbs, with barely a patch of skin untouched. Everything hurt from head to foot, and while nothing appeared to be broken, his muscles and joints were raw with pain. He bathed in salt water in an effort to ease his discomfort, then slept until dinner and went down to the dining hall. Neither Sebek nor Eveline were sitting across from him, said a word to him while he ate. When the meal was finished, he rose, nodded to them, and went directly back to bed. The days and weeks that followed were marked by further battering and bruising, but after a time it lessened as he slowly improved his responses to the attacks, and his anticipation grew sharper and more effective. After 2 months, he was skilled enough to be able to block almost every blow Big Oost gave him, and to keep the other not only at bay, but also off balance with counter strikes. His body toughened, and his confidence grew by leaps and bounds. Even his taciturn, acerbic trainer began nodding and voicing approval, and Paxson was starting to feel he might really belong at Paranor with the Druids. By then, he was studying magic with Sebek in the mornings, classes that were informal, and mostly a sharing of the young Druid's information on how magic worked, rather than actual practice. Before you can learn magic, you have to understand it, he told Paxton. Not just in the raw, instinctual way that you came to discover the magic in your sword, but in an intellectual fashion. You have to appreciate the ways in which it can both help and hurt you, because it can, sometimes without your meaning it to do so, sometimes without warning or reason, and mostly because you are too reckless and unthinking in your use of it. I didn't feel any of that when I fought against Arcanon, Paxton pointed out. They were sitting in one of the classrooms, just the two of them. If anything, it felt exhilarating. Yes, and there's danger in that too. Magic can become addictive. Magic is addictive. You need to be aware of that and not let it become so much a part of your life that it comes to dominate you. All druids run this task. Every time they use magic, they chance crossing a line that they can't cross back over. Brona, in the time of Alanon, was one such druid. A man who delved too deeply into the arts and was consumed as a result. I'm not saying this would happen to you. You need to know that magic is never safe and never predictable. It responds to you, to who and what you are inside. It adapts, and sometimes it wants to change you. How am I supposed to protect myself against that? Paxton wanted to know. How do I measure the amount of magic extended so that it doesn't do me some sort of damage? Practice, mostly. But understanding the danger and being aware of it beforehand helps too. You are less at risk than the druids who use magic all the time and in varying forms. Your sword is a limited, recognizable sort of magic. There aren't that many parameters to its use. Eventually, you will come to know them all, unless you over-engage in use of that magic. Your exposure and the resultant anger isn't that great. So it went. They discussed how a nuanced use of magic could be mastered, how emotional control could help create the necessary balance between what was intended and unexpected consequences. Sebek explained how, over time, Paxton would come to understand uses of his sword's magic that he could not even imagine now. The magic's well was deep and cold, but its taste was sweet and life-giving. Paxton's choice to embrace it would give him strength and purpose. He need only be aware of its limitations and vicissitudes. Mostly, Paxton agreed with Sebek in his analysis and explanation of magic's workings, though he longed to experiment and discover its limits. But the young druid was adamant. He must be patient, and he must wait. His concentration now must be on his weapons training. Ustmandara would not stand for distractions that using magic at this point, even if it was only testing the limits of his sword, would cause. So more time passed, and more lessons were learned, and better results were achieved on the practice field, but Paxton's patience was slowly, steadily eroding. Then, just over 2 months into his time at Paranor, he was summoned to the chambers of the Ardris.